Hello, I'm Angie Dixon, President of the Indigent Alliance. Welcome to our bonus episode podcast, Rethinking EHS. I am very excited to be here today with Ross Griffiths, the Managing Director of Environment Analyst.
Thanks, Angie. Can I just say thank you for having me on? I'm really looking forward to our chat together.
So let's start with Environment Analyst. Of course, I know you and the Indigent Alliance knows you and our consultants know you, but maybe you could give us a little bit of perspective. What do you do and how do you contribute to the industry?
Yeah, sure. So Environment Analyst is a global market intelligence events and media business operating globally. We serve engineering, environmental and sustainability consultancies worldwide, and we provide companies like Inogen and like Tonkin & Taylor, like Antea, with market intelligence, news, insights, but also networking opportunities that can help them get a strategic advantage in the market by being informed and being well connected.
So let's talk about history. If you think about the environmental consulting company or the environmental industry, what have been some of the historical trends that have impacted it over the last few years?
Wow. There's been so many different pinch points that the sector's had to navigate, going way back to the global financial crash. But if you think recently, since the pandemic, I think the years 2022 to 25, I would say we're characterized by an almost universal acceptance and buy-in from stakeholders of all types that actually the climate change was happening, is happening. We need to transition our energy markets to more sustainable forms. We need to reach net zero. We need to shore up our supply chains. So there was this great kind of buy-in from across the world, I felt, towards that. And that helped shape the industry, helped prompt some really high growth rates in the environmental consulting sector over that period of time. And I'd say from 2025 onwards, the market has continued to grow really strongly. But there's a little bit of an uneasiness settling in about the economy and about the politics and global conflict, about the language around sustainability. And we seem to have kind of returned to a sort of a shareholder primacy kind of landscape where it's very transactional. But regardless, because of all this change and adaptation, I think from a client perspective, it's no doubt that in the last 5 years, the environmental consulting sector has grown by about 54% globally. So a huge transformation. And I think it shows that clients, to solve these challenging EHS and environmental issues that they have, are more willing to use environmental consultants, EHS providers around the world to solve their challenges. One other thing that I think is quite interesting is a lot of the environmental practices are part of kind of group engineering firms, and we've seen over the last since 2019 the proportion of their revenues, group revenues that come from environmental consultancy, has grown from 19% to about 32% today. So these environmental specialists are playing an increasing role within big multidisciplinary organizations, which I find fascinating.
I mean, we're a global economy, as I see it. It's really hard to say, okay, the US is going to sit over here and the UK is going to sit over there and, by all the other countries in between. So that global economy and all of the different perspectives that are coming from a regulatory standpoint, but also I think from a consumer standpoint, right? That pressure from consumers and their expectations that companies are doing the right thing, no matter what they're calling it, whether it's ESG or sustainability or environmental, but that they're doing the right thing and being responsible, regardless of what regulatory framework is being put in place. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely. And I think we're just working through our US market assessment right now. It's going to be published in a couple of weeks. And one of the really interesting things about it is we're revising up the forecast from what we had last year. And it's because we're not actually seeing any drop-off in demand for our ESG and sustainability services necessarily. We're seeing the language change. We're seeing the way that it's referred to is very different. But the actual underpinning drivers are still there, very much so, regardless of what administration is or what part of the world you're in. So yeah, the drivers are still there, and I think we'll get on to some of the major trends in a little bit. But I do think the way that sustainability, EHS, environmental compliance can be used to boost your bottom line and reduce your risk, it's just going to be an ever-growing driver.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good segue into trends. So let's think about 2026. What are the major shifts and factors that organizations are looking, how they're preparing across that environmental landscape?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems kind of obvious to say, right, given what's going on in the world right now, but the rising cost of energy, I think, is really starting to shape drivers in the industry and shape global economies more broadly. So I think we're seeing clients look at those oil prices now and thinking to themselves, I need to reduce my reliance and my exposure on these energy markets. So energy efficiency, on-site renewables, conventional carbon capture storage are all going to become really an interesting play in the next few years. And I think that's only going to accelerate because energy prices have been going up for years. They're more volatile than ever before. So I think that's a real interesting element of the market for sure. I do think, as I mentioned before, that need to secure return on investment and risk reduction means that clients now want their environmental specialists and sustainability specialists to be economically astute and laser focused on business outcomes in a way that I've not seen before. I mean, it was always part of any tender, right? It always had value in there and value to the end customer. But I do think that if your bid writers or your project managers or your report authors cannot translate those environmental solutions into value creation, I think you could be exposed to those projects coming under scrutiny. And that's a real change in the market that I've seen personally. Digital adaptation is another one, and I know you did a really good podcast on this that I watched, so it was very interesting. But I think the AI revolution is changing the sector in all sorts of ways. There's the obvious ones of the services you provide to your clients, but then there's the piece about how are you valuing that work that involves AI, and how are you billing it? Are you doing value-based pricing? Are you still doing hourly pricing? What does these solutions mean to your graduates or your new staff that are just coming through the company? It's you must have seen this too, Angie. It's a real change, right?
Yeah. And we're always being challenged, I think, also by our clients. Like you say, that value, is it risk reduction? Are we charged by the hour? Are we reducing our time? Are we helping them see a greater return? But yeah, keep going, because I'm very curious what else you're hearing on a broader scale as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the broader scale, one thing that has got a lot of bandwidth in the markets is sustainability and ESG, right? And I know, if you're in certain places in the world, it's a language that maybe you don't want to say as much right now. And I think we'd need a 24-hour podcast to cover what's going on in ESG. But I do think that generally clients are still really committed to ensuring environmental standards and resiliency remain high, risk is reduced, and there's a lot of ESG work still going on. It's just not really being talked about that much. I've heard some people refer to it as green hushing, but it's not really. So it's a really interesting market, but I think clients have very little appetite to compromise on issues like contaminated land and PFAS and PM 2.5 and asbestos and water, ecological degradation, because it's just not worth it. It's not worth it for their brand. It's not worth it for future risk. So these underpinning drivers are still very strong, and it's great to see. I think on that last point, and I think that plays well into the Energy Alliance in many ways, because I think I'm seeing the market really pivot to focusing on those EHS services, and I think that's really good to see. I think the Energy Alliance is very well placed in that space. I think that the firms and organisations that you have in your alliance mean that you can deliver those services really well. And it's actually the fastest growing service area that we have in our entire global market assessment, with a 5-year compound annual growth rate of 7.4%, which means in monetary terms that by 2029 there's going to be an additional $3.8 billion a year being spent on EHS than there is currently. So there's a lot of market to aim for.
Which is always good news. So, just coming back to your point about ESG and sustainability, and there's still a lot of effort being, happening around those areas. We are finding it interesting in the United States. I can, I guess, at least represent that with global clients, where they're just being quieter. So I don't know that the hushing is green hushing as much as it is putting their heads down and doing the right thing, doing the responsible thing, and still continuing on a longer vision than a shorter term response to the disruptions that are happening either in the United States or other places that could impact your ESG and sustainability efforts. So I see the vernacular changing more than the initiatives. Which to me is positive. Obviously, as somebody who believes we need to respond to climate change, we need to be doing the right things. That's good. Maybe it's sad we're not talking about it as robustly and publicly as we might like.
I do think that we're going just to go ad lib a bit, but I do think that the noise around ESG did get a little bit too much because we actually went through an exercise here at Environmentalist. We brought a lot of industry actors together and we tried to define what ESG meant, and it became really difficult because the client saw ESG as one thing, the consultants saw it as another thing. Then you had the kind of whole ESG advisory, sustainability advisory services kind of became ESG as well. No one knew what ESG was, and I think it was kind of inevitable that it would come under a lot of scrutiny, I think. So I think in many ways this scrutiny on it and the need to really hammer down to value creation for your clients is actually a good thing in the long run.
Yeah, one of the ways that we've responded, and I say maybe just us as Inte US, but also globally, is looking at our typical EHS services as part of ESG, helping companies tell the story and draw the lines between all the good things that you do around EHS, and that is ESG or it is sustainability. There are ways to help, move your mark with the things that you do every day. So yeah, I think that complication is also why it got a little quieter, but we're still doing, I think, really good things, which is important.
Thanks. Okay. And investors are still very keen on understanding the impacts of ESG on their assets. So, and ultimately it comes down to where the money goes.
Yeah, for all of us, right? Like you say, it goes back to that value creation. So are you seeing regional trends? I mean, I could talk about the US and you can represent the UK probably, but I mean, what are you seeing regionally? Do you see that there is distinct differences in what's happening in our industry, globally in different locations?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I think if I was to look at sustainability as a theme, I do think in the UK and Europe, it still hasn't kind of faced the same levels of scrutiny, sustainability initiatives on the whole, that I think they're being faced with maybe on more on the federal side in the US. So I think, you've got a UK government that's very pro green initiatives. They want to invest in renewable energy. We've just had an announcement today that all new housing built is going to have solar panels and heat pumps. So, we are still going for it on that front. And I think that reflects, the position that we're in as a country. We don't have a lot of our own energy. The North Sea is a mature basin. And so we need renewables. We need to invest in those. But from Europe's point of view, I'm finding that more generally, and this includes the UK, the cost of living and the inflationary crisis are really biting. I think all the regulatory drivers in Europe are there, albeit some of them are getting watered down slightly, like CSRD. But I think the regulatory drivers are there, and they're still leading the world in terms of being the leading light on environmental policy. The problem is having the money to pay for some of these things, and it's why the omnibus package came along, is there were concerns of what it would do to industry. So, I mean, what are you seeing in the US, Angie?
Yeah, obviously our regulatory framework is not the driver right now. So we really see regionally, I would say there's a polarization. You still have sort of the private sector still knowing that we need to go around renewables. And especially, even now we're feeling the crunch currently in the US with, rising oil prices. So that becomes very material then. And the response to that is, I think, starts pushing those agendas even further. So the regulatory framework is not doing, it's not the driver. It still goes back to that private industry seeing the long game, and then also feeling pressure, many of these organizations have, very large vested interests across the globe. So they're responding to the regulatory requirements, say, out of the EU, whether it's, related to CBAM or it's just related to CSRD. They're having to respond to that. And then a lot of times they're looking at doing that globally, saying, okay, if we're going to, put this in place just for the EU, we're going to do it globally because it's the strictest standard. And that allows us to be forward thinking. So I think that maybe the good news is we're still influencing each other, both the good and the bad, but it's moving forward. And, my impression is, like I said, that companies still want to do the right thing, not just for, environment or for climate change mitigation, but they want to do the right thing for the business, that it can be, survive the long term. So yeah, it's an interesting, definitely an interesting time, I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you think there are still kind of developing markets that are going maybe in some interesting directions too? I think the Middle East, there's been a lot of conflict in that region now for a while, and I think it was looking like a really exciting market in the way that it was developing with the Red Sea project, and you got Saudi Arabia's World Cup bid 2034, and Mazda on the line, and some really interesting projects that a lot of good was going to be done through. But I think the conflict there has just meant that projects will find it really hard to push forward right now. So that's a bit of a problem for the industry, for those that have those businesses in the Middle East. I think Latin America, and particularly South America, has got some really interesting runway to come. We're seeing a lot of interest from particularly the European and the US consultants in looking at in particularly areas like Brazil and Argentina again to get involved in those markets. And I think one thing that's come out of the US administration is this kind of I guess it's a kind of move back to the Monroe Doctrine. I know that there's been the Donroe Doctrine has been floating around as well, but I think it's clear that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on investing in South America, and I think that's going to lead to energy extraction, minerals extraction. It's going to lead to a lot of infrastructure investment. So I think that's quite an interesting market coming forward, and they're adapting their regulatory frameworks all the time as well, and bringing them up to kind of European standards. So it's an interesting market.
Yeah, definitely. And I, my next question was about, what do you see as sort of the fastest growing client sector globally? And it's funny you bring up like Brazil, and I keep hearing about agriculture and sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture. And, you think about a lot of the Latin American countries, and there are going to be interesting industries that are highly impacted by, environmental concerns, but yet have huge growth potential for those countries that are developing. So I can see that. But what are you seeing on a global basis?
I guess the obvious one is energy and utilities. In our market assessment, the client sector that's forecast to grow the most by 29 is energy and utilities, by which we mean energy producers, electricity transmission, water and waste utilities. We forecast that by 2029, that market for environmental services to support those clients will be $7 billion greater than it currently is a year. So there's a huge market growth opportunity. It's data centers, it's AI capabilities, it's the need for new generation capacity, investing in grid infrastructure. There's some huge projects out there, and just updating transmission networks. Even here in the UK, here we have our Great Grid Upgrade. It's a multi-billion-pound asset management framework. It's huge. And then you've got water in the mix as well. And I think managing finite water resources is going to become a huge problem as we go into a heat-stressed world. But the second-ranked client sector for growth actually is the services sector. And I think that includes, food and beverage, professional services, retail, technology. I think we are in an era where the success of organizations is going to be determined by their ability to keep their costs down. And if that means bringing things in on site or shoring up the supply chains, making them more resilient. You mentioned agriculture, a chocolate manufacturer making sure that its supply of cocoa is secure for the next 20 years. Things like that are going to become extremely important as businesses adapt. And I think that's why environmental consultants and EHS providers around the world are going to be well placed to help them navigate those challenges, regardless of what's going on in the political world. This is a business problem, not not a political issue. It's needed.
And when we talk about regional as well, if you think about supply chain, that vulnerability of being able to secure your supply chain, manage your scope 3 is challenging. And I know we talk with a lot of our associates that are in some of those countries that are exporting, and it takes some sophistication to be able to meet the requirements of, say, an EU. And I agree, that's something that will continue to grow because those some of those locations are the only places where the supply chain is going to secure the the products for whether you're talking about beer or chocolate, right? So,
and that must be really hard for those organizations in these developing nations because they might have their local set of compliance rules and then the European set, which is miles apart. So it's exactly why companies like an organization like the Energy Alliance and Antea are needed.
Well, thank you all for joining us on our bonus episode of Rethinking EHS. As you can see, the environmental industry is shifting. We're seeing a lot of change, but we're definitely critical to the future success of whether it's ESG, sustainability, environmental deliberateness in all of the industries, I think, that many of us work and play. So it's exciting to hear that we can have a positive mark on seeing some of the initiatives come to fruition, but also setting the stage for helping multinational organizations really define how they can have an impact that's true to their company, brings value to their company, and of course, in the long run, helps them be resilient through times of change and even disruption. So you can always find additional information on our website at Energy Alliance, and please follow us on LinkedIn or follow us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much.